I have a bad habit of telling everybody 15 minutes and then forgetting to look at my watch so that I know when 15 minutes is. But am I right, it's been 15 minutes? Yeah? Okay. So the others will come in when they come in. Let's get started. The important people are here. One of the most, I'm just going to pick up where I left off because I have so much material I want to cover and still leave room for questions. One of the most common rhetorical devices in English academic writing is the use of connectors and transitional words. And these words show the relationships between sentences and they show the relationships between paragraphs. And you know these words. They're words like therefore, on the other hand, as a result, nevertheless, as discussed earlier, as we shall see. But these words are critical in English because the trick in English is what we say to walk the reader through your thinking so that the reader will understand your material only in the way that you want the reader to understand it. If you give the reader a bunch of unconnected material, the reader will connect it in his or her own way. And you want the reader to connect it only in the way you have in mind. So you have to very carefully lead the reader through your argument. I think this is sometimes a difficult concept for people, say in Denmark or Norway, where it's very, monocultural countries. They think that they have, multicultural issues, but their multicultural population is 6%, 5%. But the US, UK, Canada, Australia, the countries in which English is the first language are all very multicultural and have been dealing with multicultural issues for a long time. And we never presuppose a cultural homogeneity. We always assume that the reader is not like us. The reader will not think like us, and therefore we take no chances that the reader might understand. We very carefully present our argument to make sure that the reader cannot misunderstand. So we always use these words to connect between sentences, therefore, thereby, as a result, on the other hand, nevertheless, and so on. Interestingly, because framing is so important in English, there's a very specific and subtle rhetorical device worth mentioning here, and it's framing actually at the level of the sentence. So most writers, including native English speakers, when we want to show a contrast inside a sentence, will use the word but. I like ice cream, but I don't like cake. However, in an academic sentence, and academic sentences tend to be longer, in a long academic sentence, the reader is reading blah, 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 and the reader is finally ready for a full stop or a period in the end of the sentence. And suddenly the reader sees comma, but the reader's emotional reaction is, oh no, it's not even done, now they're switching on me. So I always edit to say, keep the reader happy. So I never use but. I start the sentence with although. Because when you start with although, you're telling the reader from the very first word that a change is coming, and the reader is prepared. Although I like ice cream, comma, I don't like cake. Do you see the strategy? This is a good editor and a good writer. Good writers must be good self-editors. You have to be your best self-editor before you give the paper to a native speaker editor. Always is looking at the reader. What will make the reader happy? So this is what I mean by framing. Even at the level of the sentence, a good writer always prepares the writing to make it the easiest possible for the reader to understand. And one of the biggest compliments I ever got on this book was from a French scholar who was in one of my lectures at Berkeley, who had bought the book, and when she came back the following week for the next lecture, said to me, "I can't believe how delightful your book is to read. It's so easy." She said, "I read a little bit in bed every night before I go to sleep." And I said, "I never thought of it as bedtime reading." But she said, "It's so easy to read. It's so much fun." And to me, when someone says it's so easy to read, that's a compliment. Now, again, it depends on the culture. In the French and the German culture, someone once asked a famous French professor why he didn't write in a more comprehensible manner. And he looked at her as if she were some worm on the ground and said, "Comprehensible? If people can understand me, then they wouldn't think I'm much of an intellectual. I have to write sentences that are so long and involved nobody can understand them, and make up new words and make up new concepts in a new vocabulary. And then when people have trouble understanding, they say, 'Oh, look how smart he must be.'" Well, that works in French and German. It might work in Russian. It does not work in English. It does not. We want, in English, what makes the intellectual is the person who can give the reader the most information in the fewest possible words. Take the least time away from the busy reader. The focus here is on analysis, and to analyze means to break into parts. So, for example, if you take the French philosopher Michel Foucault. Foucault is almost unreadable. So if you quote Foucault, you're not, in English, let's say, you're not going to do your reader any favor because it's not going to make any sense. So what the good English writer does is to paraphrase Foucault, which means to do it in his or her own words, and instead of taking one huge long sentence, break it down into 5 or 6 and say, Foucault says blah, blah, blah is true, and given this, then we can see such and such. And so each time you make a sentence and you start your next sentence with the end of the first one, and you start the next sentence with the end of that one, and you've broken it down into 6 sentences, and the reader says, oh, so that's what Foucault means. Isn't this writer brilliant that they can make Foucault so easily understandable? Do you understand? That's what a scholar is in English. Someone who can make things clear, not who can make things unclear. It's a different tradition. It doesn't mean the other is bad, it's just different. So, let's go back to the psychology of reading as it applies to the English linguistic culture. The most important principle is what in English is known as the golden rule. And you may, depending on the level of your, relationship with or familiarity with Russian Orthodoxy, may be familiar with the sentence, but not as the golden rule. And it's the statement that Jesus supposedly made, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Okay? And of course, Jesus said that because he was a good Jew, and he got the statement from Hillel the Elder, who had lived hundreds of years before, who framed it in the other way, do not do unto others what is hateful to you. Because not everybody will like what you like, but if you don't like being robbed, murdered, raped, stolen from, whatever, probably the other person won't either. So, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. If we rewrite that for writing, it would be write unto others as you would have them write unto you. What does that mean? In English, it means this, if you'll all look here. It means you start in the upper left-hand corner, and the reader can just read without having to go back to read something twice because it didn't make sense. So the reader should be able to read it immediately. And the reader should never have to play yo-yo, like looking down and then back again, or up and then back again. The reader should never leave his or her place on the page, so you should never use words like above or below, mentioned above, mentioned below. Never say above, never say below, because it distracts the reader from your argument, and the only thing that matters in English is your argument. That's the only thing that matters. And the reader should be able to understand every word without being sent to the dictionary to look words up. They should be normal academic words, not strange ones to show how smart you are. And the reader should find the reading flows and the argument flows. I was very fortunate many years ago, and I heard Nobel laureate for writing Isaac Bashevis Singer, as an older man, give a lecture and about writing. And at the end, you know that it's so tiring for these famous writers because everybody asks the same questions no matter where they go. And somebody said, what advice would you give to a young writer, blah, blah, blah. And I'm paraphrasing, but what he said was brilliant. He said, in essence, no matter how beautiful the description, no matter how exciting the scene, no matter how wonderful the character, and no matter what the important point is you want to make, if it gets in the way of the story, throw it out. The only thing that matters is the story. So for academic writing, I would say the same thing. The only thing that matters is your argument. If you have something that doesn't fit the argument, throw it out. It goes in another paper, but it doesn't go here. The only thing that matters is that your argument works. So, to accomplish the goal of writing unto others as we would have them write unto us in English means we have to pay attention to such simple but critical issues and concepts as word length, sentence length, paragraph length, and active and passive voice. We also have to pay close attention to grammar and clarity of meaning for reasons made clear in the next principle, which is my definition of a good sentence. And here goes. A good sentence needs to be read only once. That's it. A good sentence needs to be read only once. If I'm in the middle of I don't care how excellent your vocabulary, how brilliant your style, how perfect your punctuation, if I'm in the middle of reading your sentence and I go, what? Huh? And I have to go back and read it again, hang it up and kiss it goodbye. It's a bad sentence. Okay? So put another way, a good sentence is clear on first reading for only one meaning. Only one possible meaning. If a sentence has two possible meanings, it's not clear, and therefore it's no good. And I'm going to give you a quick example, and I want you to tell me if it's clear for one meaning, okay? It's not a very academic sentence, but it will work. Sandra likes golf better than her husband. Sandra likes golf better than her husband. Is that clear for one meaning? Yes or no? No? I knew what I meant. What do you mean it's not? So what meanings do we have here? Can somebody shout one out? Come on, be impolite. Shout out. What's one possible?
She likes more golf than she likes her husband.
Okay, so she likes golf better than she likes her husband. That's one meaning.
The husband likes golf better than she likes golf.
No, it would be the other way around. Sandra likes...
So both like golf, but he doesn't.
She likes it better.
She likes it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
So it depends if it's object or subject, and since we don't have the endings the way you do in Russian, we can't tell. Sandra likes golf better than her husband likes golf, or Sandra likes golf better than she likes her husband, right? Now, If you knew her husband George the way I know her husband George, you'd have known what I meant. So, why didn't you know what I meant? It's a serious question. Why didn't you know what I meant? When I said Sandra likes golf better than her husband, why didn't you know what I meant?
Because we don't know the context.
That's it. You don't know George. And I want to suggest to all of you that every single writer, including myself, because we're human beings, we suffer from tunnel vision when we write. I know what I mean when I write that sentence. What do you mean you understand it differently? Which is why everybody needs an editor, because we are so clear about what we mean, we forget that we may have written a sentence that has another meaning to someone else. And it turns out that English lends itself to double meanings more than most languages do. So that in English, it isn't good enough to write to be understood. We have to edit ourselves so carefully to write so that we cannot be misunderstood. And that is the goal of all rewriting. We have a very famous saying in English that there's no such thing as good writing, only good rewriting. Because your first draft is where you find out what you want to say. You think you know. Until you write it down, you don't know. And your second, third, fourth, fifth drafts are to say it so it works. The first draft is the discovery. Now you become the artist. Now you become the craftsperson, and you make it work. And of course, as a second language speaker, you always go and get a native speaker editor once you're done. That's a given. That's just a given. So, again, as I said earlier, unlike in many European linguistic cultures, the English culture makes the reader the key person. And our academic culture says that the best writer is the one who gives the most information while taking the least time from the reader. And that's 200 and 300 years old in English. This is not something new. This is a concept that's been around forever. It's just part of the culture. So our goal is to show the reader how well we have digested and synthesized the material, and how succinctly, how tightly, but without sacrificing meaning, how tightly and succinctly we can deliver that information. There should be no unnecessary words. So not surprisingly then, the next principle is to keep your sentences relatively short. Because an English sentence, unlike, say, a Germanic one, which kind of like a snake growing another tail, just keeps growing and growing and growing, in English, a sentence can be only so long before it collapses under the weight of too many ideas, too much length. So rather than give you numbers for counting, I'll tell you the best way to figure out if a sentence in English is too long, but you can't cheat. It's called the breath test. Without taking any extra air in, read the sentence out loud. And if you have to, at a normal rate of speed, not fast, and if you have to take a breath while you're reading the sentence out loud, it's too long. That's it. The reader should be able to read it in one mental breath. That's just the simplest. I mean, again, I could talk a lot more, but I only have so much time. Break the sentence in two, break it in three. It's, again, you're not talking down to your reader, you are simply giving your reader what he or she expects. So how do you keep your sentences short without treating the reader like a simpleton? It's easy. You focus on one concept at a time, and when you're done with the concept, you end the sentence and you move on to another one. You don't try to fit 5 and 6 concepts into an English sentence. It does not work. The other way to keep sentences short is to reduce long and unnecessary phrases to single words. This has to do with what we call structure words in English. Every language has content words and structure words. The content is the content of your paper, your philosophy, your linguistics, your research, your history, your archaeology. The structure words are like the glue that hold the sentences together. And there's no reason for a structure word to be long. So instead of due to the fact that, which is 5 words, use one word. Due to the fact that means, anybody? Because. In the event that means, like in the event that there's a fire, let's all run out of here. It means if. In regards to means about. In view of the above means therefore. Not later than means by. Keep these words short so that the only length in your sentence is for the content, which is all the reader cares about. All of these words are like fog and mist getting in the way of the meaning. Now, I want to make a couple of brief comments about this point. The first is that when I was teaching this point to the Russian scholars in November, they said to me, we are taught that in Russian, our sentences should have beautiful words and beautiful style. So we think our English should be beautiful as well, and these words sound beautiful to us. Why shouldn't we use them? And I said, these words sound beautiful to you? And they said, yes. I said, uh-oh. So I said, okay, first of all, in English, we make our sentences beautiful by always varying our sentence structure. No 2 sentences in a row should have the same structure. Okay? If my sentence says, the Russian government did such and such, I would not start the next sentence again with a simple subject and a verb. I would say, given the issue of blah, 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 comma, the government continued to do. I would keep changing the structure. I would use elegant, precise vocabulary, but I'd get these words, these structure words, out of the way. Okay? The second point I want to make here about style has to do with repetition of words. In the States, as in Russia, we are also taught never repeat. Don't repeat the same word. Don't repeat the same word. But there's a difference between what you do in Russian and what we do in English. In English, we don't repeat verbs. We don't repeat adverbs. We don't repeat adjectives. So if in this sentence I say analyze, the next one I say examine, the next one I say explore, the next one I say look into. But we never, ever change the main nouns in our sentences, in our papers. Never. So it would drive the English reader crazy. So if you're writing about young people and your first sentence talks about teenagers, then you stick with the word teenagers. Don't suddenly say adolescents and then young people and then youth. And some people even use youngsters, which is wrong because that means pre-teenage. You keep the same word. And so I was going crazy with some of the Russian papers where they would say Russia, the Russian Federation, Moscow, the Russian government, the Russian people, all to mean the same thing. And I'd say, stop it, you can't do that. Pick one word and stick with it. Because in English, if you write the word committee with a capital C, and 3 lines later you write the word committee with a lowercase c, the reader thinks you're talking about 2 different committees, and it's the same word. So you don't mess with nouns. So the example I give when I'm outside of Russia is how would you like it in a novel if the author made the main character had different names every other sentence. Of course, in Russia, you do that because you have several names for people. It could be the first name, it could be with a patronymic, it could be, but in English, we don't do that. In English, we don't do that. If the character is Sandra, the character is Sandra, and maybe a friend calls her Sandy, but she is Sandra, she doesn't suddenly become Ms. So-and-so in the next line. You keep the nouns the same. You don't mess with the noun. Okay? That's very, very important. It's just not acceptable. It's one of the many differences you have to get used to. So, next principle, keep your paragraphs reasonably short. While sentences in English are often defined as representing a complete thought, paragraphs are considered the essential unit of meaning, and a reader expects to be able to mentally digest a paragraph in one reading. So if the paragraph is really long, and the reader has to kind of go, oh, this is too much, I have to think about this before I go on, your paragraph is too long, and the reader won't like it. Most people, when they see a long paragraph, immediately go into mega reading, put the paper down and don't continue. Now, what you have to do as part of your journal analysis is look at the average paragraph length in the journal in English and see what they do. The Brits tend to have longer paragraphs than the Americans, not always, but they have a weird style. It's kind of like Morse code. They go long, long, short, long, short, short, long, long, short, long, short, 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 and I mean really short, like 3 lines, really short. So I can't do it. I wouldn't try to imitate it. Basically, what I do in my courses is I give a huge paragraph to the students. I have them make their eyes kind of fuzzy. Take a piece of paper and go down line by line by line without reading the words, just looking at the length. And then when it's too long for them, go back up 1 line and count. And these are scholars all over Europe. And occasionally somebody will say 16 or 18. Most of them don't even like going over 8 or 9 lines. Your maximum paragraph length in academic writing is 14, but you're better between 10 and 12. If you have the perfect 18-word paragraph that's got 1 complete thought or a unit of meaning in it, somewhere in the middle there will be an in addition or furthermore or however, and you start a new paragraph with it. And the reader will just happily go to the next paragraph, the argument will flow, and it will be broken up into bite-sized pieces. I believe that giving a reader a very long paragraph is like giving somebody a ½ kilo of steak at the end of a fork and saying, it's all yours if you can eat it in 1 bite. What do you mean eat it in 1 bite? I can't even get it in my mouth, let alone digest it. And the reader wants to be able to mentally digest a whole paragraph in 1 reading. And with the advent of computers, people's idea of what a paragraph length should be have gotten shorter and shorter and shorter. It's just a change over time.
Natalie, I'm very sorry, but there was some misunderstanding. Some people had understood not 14 words.
Oh, did I say words by mistake? 14 lines.
Lines, yes.
Not words.
Okay.
Lines. I'm sorry. Thank you. No, 14 lines maximum. It's about lines of type. And you see, your mind, your eyes move approximately 4 times faster than your mind can process. So while you're reading a sentence here, your eye is moving down the page and going, uh-oh, long paragraph coming, warning, warning, danger signal. So reader automatically sees a long paragraph and the brain goes, uh-oh, shut down, don't want to do this. So it's very important that the visuals given the reader are comfortable for the reader. But never have paragraphs exactly the same length. It's very boring. Just like sentences the same length, paragraphs the same length. It's very, very boring. Don't do that. Most importantly, write, especially as Russians, write exclusively in the active voice. Okay? The passive voice, in brief, I mean, I have a whole 2-hour discussion on this. The passive voice makes sentences longer, and it eliminates the personal pronouns that connects you to your reader. And the reader ends up going, this was done. Well, it was done by whom? Who did it? When did they do it? The reader always wants to know in English who is doing what. Who is responsible for what? What is the actor here? This is very important in English. English is it's noun-centered but verb-driven action. And the verb that drives it has to have a subject. It cannot be a passive verb because a passive verb doesn't drive. It just sits there and moves the action backwards. So if you're not exactly sure what active and passive means in English, it's the difference between I like ice cream and ice cream is liked by me. Now imagine yourself in New York going into a Ben & Jerry's ice cream store and saying, oh boy, Cherry Garcia fudge is liked by me. They'll bring the men in the white coats to take you away. You sound nuts. Nobody speaks like this. And good writing in English is speech cleaned up for the rules of grammar. It's elegant speech. You should write as you would speak elegantly. Okay? So I see papers that say something useless like, this report was written last Friday. Well, of course it was written. That's stupid. It couldn't be a report unless it was written. Who wrote it? Who's responsible for the information in it? Whom do I go to if I have questions? I don't know. I just found it on my desk and it said Friday on it. This is useless. This is bad writing in English. And the passive voice is poor writing for other reasons, and one has to do with the psychology of reading. When you read in English, as in Russian, okay, your eye moves from left to right across the page, right? And action moves in English from left to right. So if I say, let's get aggressive here, Joe hit John. Joe hit John. No endings in English. How do you know who did the hitting and who got hit? How do you know? The order. The one before the verb is the one doing the action, and the one after the verb is the one who got it, right? Okay. It turns out that in Old English of about 1,000 years ago, actually, about 1,000 years ago, 1,200 years ago, you could say John Joe hit, Joe John hit, hit Joe John, hit Joe John, John Joe, because there would have been endings in English in masculine, feminine, and neuter, okay? And for object and for subject and case endings, just as in Russian, and case changes. But the language changed in 1066 when William the Conqueror beat Harold at the Battle of Hastings, and the French took over England for the next several hundred years. And that's when the language of Beowulf became the language of Chaucer, and English became this way. So when you say, Joe hit John, or I wrote the article, the movement of your eye and the movement of the action are going in the same direction. However, when you say, the report was written by so-and-so, well, you have the report was written. Oh, the report's not doing the action. It's having something done to it, so the arrow goes this way. And who's doing the action that's being done? Well, so-and-so is doing the action. So that while your eye is moving this way, the action in the passive voice is moving the opposite way. And it takes the reader double the mental time to read the sentence. Now, given that you want a happy reader, do you want to make the reading twice as hard for the reader to get to your meaning? That's counterproductive. Writing in the passive voice goes against the way the brain processes information. And there are arguments in English. Some people say the passive voice is okay. Some people say, well, it's more objective. And that's garbage. There's no objectivity involved in the voice you choose. Voice is simply voice. It doesn't make the information more or less objective at all. So I would say always write in the active voice because it forces you to be specific. And this is the other problem I had with the Russian papers, the big problem, lack of specificity. All these general, theoretical, cosmic and global sentences, and I'm going, give me specifics. Who's doing what? You made a statement, but you didn't support it. Give me the details, and the details are missing. We want details. It's in fiction, there's a term, a statement we use to teach young writers. We say, show, don't tell. Don't say, he got angry. That's telling. And in academic writing, if you say he got angry, that's a conclusion. And you don't put your conclusions till the end. You need to show your data. You need to show your argument. So if you want to show it, you say, he slammed his fist on the table. You don't say, he got angry. And the same thing applies to academic writing. If you make a conclusionary statement, your reader says, how the hell did they conclude that? Where did that come from? Where's the proof? We expect a proof. We need all the details and all the data, and then you can conclude. And the problem with the passive voice is it's too easy to leave the details out. So my biggest recommendation would be for you as Russian writers to write exclusively in the active voice in English until you have a real handle on your English and know when, maybe 3 out of 100 sentences, a passive voice would be okay, and how to handle it. But that would be my best advice for you. Ultimately, there's no reason to make writing difficult for your reader. If the information is highly complex, don't try to cram it into one sentence to show how smart you are. The reader will follow more easily, absorb it better, admire your scholarship more if you break it down. And part of your obligation in English is to avoid ambiguity at all costs. So the passive voice causes ambiguity. Nobody knows who the actor was. And the other is improper pronoun reference, such as using the word this by itself. This shows such and such. And the reader says, this what? This argument, these data, this conclusion, this what? So never use the word this or that or these or those by themselves. Always put the noun that you're talking about after them. And sometimes people say, yeah, but I want the this to refer to the whole sentence that went before. Not in English you don't, not if you're going to be a good writer, never. So if your sentence said, I have to make up something quickly, the difference between A-1 and A-2 is the angle of blah, 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 blah. So then you start your next sentence with either this difference or this angle, depending which way you're going to go. Or this difference in the angle, or this effect on the angle. But you take whatever was in the previous sentence and you take the part you need from it to begin your next sentence with the word this. But never use this or these or those or that by itself. Okay? In addition, always anticipate your reader's questions and answer them before the reader can even think to ask them. Define all your terms the minute you mention them. I often read papers and I see a term and I say, maybe an acronym. I say, what's this? And they say, oh, well, I'm going to explain it in the next section. That's too late. You cannot confuse your reader for an instant. And this is a problem I see for Russian writers because of the implicit versus explicit cultural difference. Okay, in Russian, it's my understanding from the students I worked with that you don't want to explain too much because you're insulting your reader as if your reader doesn't know that. In English, this is the second most important thing I can say. Every paper is a self-contained universe. The reader shouldn't have to remember anything he or she read anywhere else. Everything that you need to make this argument goes in the paper right here, immediately. Okay? Every definition, every explanation. And don't take a main term in your paper and define it in a footnote. Nobody reads footnotes. If it's a definition of your main term, it goes right after the main term in a paragraph in the paper. Don't even think that. Okay? This is really, really critical for writing in English. You explain everything. For example, in political science of studies of the welfare state, everybody in welfare state studies knows Gösta Esping Anderson's typology of the 3 types of welfare state. Everybody does. But when somebody writing about welfare state issues comes to the part in the argument where they need to start talking about types, they always say, of course, the classic typology is Gösta Esping Anderson's 3 types of welfare state, the this, and the that. This one means this one means that, this one means the other. Not because the reader didn't know it, but because this is the right place in the proof to put this information. And the reader kind of skips it because the reader knows it. But you're creating a proof and you can't go A, B, C, F. Because with D and E missing, the logic is gone. And English is based on Aristotelian logic. Argumentation is based on a logical system, a system of logic. So you put everything in. You're not insulting your reader. You're giving your reader everything he or she needs to see that you have created an accurate proof. It's just a different concept. So, at this point, one other thing, yeah, that's it. So at this point, I need to talk a little bit about Aristotle. And if you don't mind, I'm going to go to the book because I had to be succinct in the book, and I just want to give a quick introduction to the way we use Aristotle and Aristotelian thinking in English. Okay? In brief, Aristotle systematized the study of rhetoric, which he defined, and I quote, course English translation, as the art of finding the best available means of persuasion in any situation. And your job as the writer, of course, in academic writing, is to persuade the reader, right, that you have a good argument, that you have said something important. Conceiving of persuasion as a strategy, Aristotle laid out 3 principal tactics for making an argument. One of them is pathos or pathos, which is appealing to the values most deeply held and the emotions most deeply felt by a particular audience. So in the academic world, it's going to be good academic work, that we want our methods to be the best. We want our theories to be the best. We want high quality, okay? The second is ethos, which is showing the speaker's trustworthiness. And that's what you do with all those citations at the beginning of your paper. You show that you are well read, you show that you are part of the academic community, that you have read the right people, that you've understood what they've said, and that's why your introduction of a paper will be top-heavy. Almost every sentence in an introduction in an English paper, in most fields, will have citations after them. And not just one, you know, so-and-so 2002, so-and-so 2007, so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so 2010, and so on. And then the third, of course, is logos, which is using logic and sound reasoning, that is, offering the audience good reasons and proofs. Okay? Although in academic writing in English, the tradition is strongest on logos and proof, elements are ethos are always present in your credentials and your proof of your knowledge in the field. And pathos shows up especially in papers hoping to influence the action of policymakers or others in their field with regard to vulnerable populations or political dangers and so on. But you can also be appealing to the readers wanting good data, good theories, sound reasoning, and so on. George Kennedy did a translation and annotation of Aristotle's On Rhetoric, a theory of civic discourse. And he includes what he calls among the most important of the concepts that Aristotle uses as frameworks for his discussion, these two forms of persuasion: inductive argument, or example, drawing a particular conclusion from one or more parallels, and deductive argument, drawing a conclusion from stated or implied premises. So Kennedy continues, and I'm quoting Kennedy now, "On rhetoric is strong in its emphasis on the importance of logical validity. There are also valuable concepts in the discussion of style, especially the demand for clarity, the understanding of the effect of different kinds of language and sentence structure," and I'll stop there. But what we see from this quote is that the commonly used deductive method and the necessity of absolute clarity, 100% clarity in the Anglo-American tradition, have their roots in Aristotle. Moreover, because both deductive and inductive reasoning involve proofs, academic writing in English takes an almost mathematical turn. Everything must be perfectly provable. And what you have are cultural ideas here. So when the French argue according to Hegel, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, there is an implicit cultural assumption, okay, implicit, that everything has opposites and you can find a happy middle. In English, when we argue according to proof, the implicit underlying belief is that everything can be proved or not. And if it's not provable, it's not worthy of discussion. If you can't prove it, why are you writing about it? It's very, very pragmatic. And so to write a good proof, we have to be totally explicit. Everything in English must be explicit. Nothing is implicit. Nothing. Memorize that. Nothing in English is implicit. Everything must be spelled out in the right place in the argument. It's totally different from Russian. Okay, and I'd like to read you one paragraph from a book called Elements of Rhetoric by G.R. Carpenter of Columbia University. This is from the 6th edition of this high school textbook, and the 6th edition was published in 1906. So what it's telling you is how old in our tradition these concepts are. But it's a wonderful paragraph, and I just ask your indulgence for this. Carpenter defines rhetoric as, quote, the art of expressing by words precisely what we mean, unquote. And his textbooks cover everything from sentence structure and paragraphing to composition, clarity, persuasion, force, and elegance. And on coherence, the idea that everything must stick together, excuse me, he writes the following. Coherence of the whole composition is strictly analogous to coherence of the sentence and of the paragraph. We must bind our words together logically into sentences, our sentences together logically into paragraphs, and our paragraphs together logically into the whole composition. The only quality indispensable in serious writing is order, as the chief aim of all composition is usually to tell the reader something which he presumably did not know before. It is obvious that to impart to him this new information, excuse me, we must begin where we and the reader have some knowledge in common, and then lead him by consecutive logical stages to that which he is to understand. For that purpose, it is absolutely necessary that our work must be carefully planned. We can no more write successfully without a definite conception of what the structure of our composition is to be than an architect can build without having in mind a well-defined and well-organized structure. Okay? That is as true today as it was 100 years ago. So, I want to know how much time I have left because I'm just realizing I may be running out of time. What do I have left? No time? Question time? Question time? Okay. Then let me say quickly that you should always outline everything before you write it. You need to pick your journals very carefully by choosing all the journals you think will fit and then eliminating all the ones that won't. Like, is this one too theoretical and your paper isn't theoretical enough? Is your paper too long and those papers are shorter? You need to eliminate, and you need to also look, even though you may want to get into the best journal possible, if all the people writing there are at Oxford and Cambridge and MIT and Berkeley, you're not going to be able to compete. Don't try. Start where you can get in and work your way up. So you first need to eliminate all the journals that won't fit. Just don't say, oh, I want to get published here. That's a waste of time. And the editors hate papers that don't fit their journal. It makes them very angry. Very angry. And then you take the journal that you want to submit to, and you very, very carefully analyze the structure, analyze the vocabulary. How do they write their abstract? What's the first sentence do? What does the second sentence do? And copy the style and write your paper in the style of the papers that are published in the journal, and that will maximize your chance of getting published. Okay? And for anonymous peer review, That's exactly what it is. The editor picks the reviewers. They are anonymous. They don't know your name. You don't know their name, and you never do. So you're getting a review by your peers, but without anyone knowing who it is, so that there are no personalities and no favoritism involved. Sometimes the reviewers are not very nice because they're working on the same project and they want your paper to fail so they can get published. But I would say 90% of the time they're very, very helpful. And papers get better as a result of being changed because of what they're told in the review. And as for what it's like to work with Russian scholars, it's an adventure. And they have a long way to go, and I have a lot to learn. So, questions? Yes, please.
Thank you very much, Professor Natali. Thank you very much, first of all, for this wonderful, really very great lecture, and I have realized a lot of very important information. I have two questions. So the first one is, when I was studying at the university, we also were taught a French system, like that you had mentioned before, that is based on Hegel, and it contains thesis, antithesis,
right,
and synthesis system. And I wonder, if I may ask you a question as an expert on American scientific journals, whether this system may be applicable, so whether we may apply the articles that are written in a French system like thesis, antithesis, synthesis to American
this is German
journals.
system. Hegel was German.
Yeah, but
the French argue according to Hegel, and the Germans don't.
For example,
the Germans don't.
For example, Sciences Politiques, I studied at Sciences. They have very strict system of thesis, antithesis, synthesis that require all practical writing in this system. And you say others are not.
Can I answer?
Yes. Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you.
You can always apply Hegel. You can always apply any philosopher you want, but you must apply it in the Aristotelian argumentation form. So you argue according to Aristotle and you say, I'm going to apply Hegel to this particular problem because Hegel's theory of thesis, antithesis, synthesis is the most applicable for the following reasons. Reason number 1, reason number 2, reason number 3. You are using Aristotelian argumentation to convince your reader that Hegel is the best philosopher or theory or whatever to apply to this particular problem. So you can use anybody you want, but you must present it in the Aristotelian frame. Does that make sense? We're not eliminating other philosophers. We're saying this is how you deliver the information. So, does that help? And second question.
Thank you so much. And just may I ask a question about material? I'm a teacher of political analysis at the universities as well. And I wonder, many Russian universities have a limited number of books on methods and methodology. One of them is Mannheim-Rich, and I wonder if there are new trends in the qualitative research methods general. But I'm just asking.
No. That's a really big question. I may not be the one to answer, except that there are a number of journals in qualitative research. I think, for example, Qualitative Inquiry, which is a really interesting journal. And what I would do is keep up with the journals to find out what they're presenting. Because if there's somebody really good out there, the people they're citing in that journal would be people then you would go to look at and see who they're citing. Okay, that's another thing. If you want to write for Journal X, look at who is being cited most commonly in that journal and make sure you cite that person too, because that's the theorist or the philosopher or whoever that the editor of that journal likes. I mean, come on, you've got to be practical. You should also see who's on the editorial board of the journal and see whether their attitudes or philosophies fit yours or don't, because if you're saying something very opposite, then that's probably not a good journal for you. You have to learn to be very, very practical. Thank you. I hope I was helpful with that, because I'm I come in, I read the analyses people do. I assume they know who to use. I assume they know what they're doing because I'm editing papers in fields. I don't know economics. I'm editing in economics. I'm editing in anthropology. I have to assume that people know what they're doing. Sometimes I look at the argument and say, I don't see why this argument is new. What's new about it? What's special about it? Why would they publish this? It's such a tiny thing. But sometimes in some fields, the tiny little thing is interesting to people. So I can't judge. I do often make them re-argue their points. And I've helped 3 papers get published in qualitative inquiry, which is not easy to get into. So I feel good about that. But yeah. That's really a little outside my expertise. I'm sorry. I wish I had more information.
Definitely. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Somebody else? Yes, please.
So first, many thanks for the talk. It was really informative for me. Then my question. So if we are talking about different writing cultures, do we have also different reading cultures? I mean, is this relation between the writer and the reader bio, or it's like we have multicultural writers and the universal readers? Or how does it work?
I think I understand you. Let me try this. There is a big discussion in English, big argument in various places about now that English is the international language, there are different Englishes, and we should do things differently for different people, and maybe we have a different way of speaking English in Norway and a different way of speaking English somewhere else. And to me, I ignore all of that because I'm a pragmatist. And I'm saying if you have an international language and then you break it down and change it everywhere, it ceases to be an international language. It no longer serves its function. So it used to be 100 years ago that French was for diplomacy and German was for science. And now, by historical accident, English has taken over both. And in 100 years, it might be Chinese for one and Arabic for another. I mean, who knows? So I think what you have to assume is that there is a way of writing in your field. For example, if you're writing philosophy, most philosophy papers don't even have sections because the idea is you should be able to follow this thing all the way through without any sections in it. Whereas if you're writing in another field, you're going to have, 10 or 12 sections throughout your paper with charts and tables. So you have to look at what is commonly done in English journals in your field, and then follow that style for that type of reader. Because there will be different types. Qualitative and quantitative people often can't read each other's writing. When I have economists in a class and we're looking at a qualitative piece, the economists go crazy because there aren't facts and figures to back it up and it's driving them nuts. This isn't logical. This isn't a proper conclusion. And then the qualitative people are going nuts because there are all these numbers and they're not interested in numbers. So it very much depends, I think, on the field and what is done. And if I'm answering you properly, what is done in the field. But ultimately, as long as it's being done in one language, it's who is my audience? My audience is people in my field. What's going on in my field, but in that particular journal? One may be more theoretical, one may be more quantitative. Did I misunderstand or?
No, I got it, yeah.
No, but did I misunderstand your question?
No.
No, okay.
So the type of the reader depends on the field.
It depends on the field and the journal, both.
Okay.
Yeah. So, for example, I'm used to teaching in the social sciences now for the last number of years, although I teach once a year for PhD students in the humanities at the University of Copenhagen. And yet the same principles apply. It's just that if you're writing an analysis of literature or a new way of looking at Jane Austen or whatever, it's going to be organized differently than an analysis that uses a data set of, single mothers in the labor market. It's just going to be organized differently. And actually, how many of you are in qualitative work as opposed to quantitative? Quantitative means numbers and figures and charts. How many of you are in qualitative where you're just developing ideas or interviewing people? Okay, qualitative writing is much more difficult to do. Quantitative work is fixed. Okay, here's what we did, here's the method we used, here's how we double checked to see that we got the right answers, here's the data set, here's what we did, here's the results, here's our comments on the results. It's very cut and dried and follows a kind of formula, much like the hard sciences. But qualitative work is much more difficult because you don't have a frame. You have to develop it from the beginning by yourself. And that's much more difficult to do, I think.
Thank you.
You're welcome. By the way, in English, we don't use the word scientist to apply to anyone in the humanities or in the social sciences. A scientist is someone working in chemistry, biology, zoology, and so on. Otherwise, you are a political scientist, a social scientist, a mathematician, an archaeologist, an academic, a professional, but you are not a scientist. We don't use that word. Yes?
Well, my question is very simple. So how do we writers refer to ourselves? We or, well...
Okay, good.
Yes, it's simple,
Okay.
but sometimes...
No, it's a big issue. Mm-hmm. It's a big issue under huge discussion. I belong to something called researchgate.com, and there's a big, out of Germany, and there's a big discussion group on whether you can use I or we and blah, 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 blah. And it's funny because people are just giving their personal opinions based on no knowledge at all. It's just like, well, I think. And some of them are pretty much out to lunch, and they're all depending on their culture in Malaysia, their culture in Dubai, their culture in, Sri Lanka, wherever. And it's kind of funny. Basically, it depends on the field. There are fields in science where you have to use the passive voice and you can't use I because it isn't done. There are other fields in science where you say, I did this, I did that. Basically, it's very simple. If you are a single author, you cannot use we to refer to yourself. You use I. You don't use it too frequently unless you're in ethnography talking about your field work. Then you can use I a lot. But there's a good and a bad to everything, because if you use I to refer to yourself, then you can use we to refer to your reader and you, as we shall see, or at we in the field. If you are multiple authors, in the humanities you're usually single authors, but in the social sciences and in economics you're almost always multiple authors, then we means we the writers, and you cannot use we to include the reader because you can have only one meaning for we per paper. Now there are journals and fields where they put the author. It's very stiff. It's very stilted, and you only do that if that's what they do in the journal.
Yes, thank you. Well, if you advise to stick to adjective style of writing, so actor, then, verb, then object, yes? But, if we're in the humanities, how I can be replaced in some varieties? Not the examples, but the idea.
That's an excellent question, and my problem in answering it is that I can edit a sentence. I have trouble editing an idea, but I'll try. In English writing, we rarely in a paper say, I believe or I think. It's considered poor style because everything in the paper you're supposed to believe, and everything in the paper is what you think. You can say, I argue, meaning this is the direction my argument will go. I argue for this idea, or I argue that the change came not from X, but from Y and Z. But what you can say is, I analyze this blah, blah, blah through the lens of X. This lens does this, and this theory does that, and philosophically we can see that. So you bring in I as little as possible, and then you stick to the subject matter itself. And in the book, if I can find it quickly, I picked I think I know where it is. Yeah. I picked a 6-paragraph introduction from an author that I loved. It was a sociology paper. And she was at Tulane in New Orleans when she wrote this. And I wanted to say to her, I'm quoting you in the book, and I'd like to send you a copy. Well, by that time, on the strength of that paper, she was teaching at Harvard. So it wasn't just me who thought it was a brilliant piece. And she uses the word I only 2 times in her 6-paragraph introduction. And both times it's to claim the territory or the niche as her own. I develop a novel approach because she's, and this is very common in English, I found something new, and I'm claiming this as mine. Otherwise, I doesn't enter into it. So, I mean, I'm trying to look for, her opening paragraph is, for example, popular support is often considered the sine qua non of revolution. Sine qua non means in Latin, that without which not. In other words, no popular support, no revolution. Nevertheless, there is little consensus among scholars about which causal factors are most important for generating popular mobilization. And each of these has references. Some scholars do this, other scholars do that. Some do this, yet others do that. She stakes out 4 positions, and then in her next paragraph shows that none of them work. She's brilliant, but without insulting any of the other people. So you learn by reading the best writers. You learn by studying how do they do it. So from now on, don't read for information and knowledge. Read also for linguistic analysis. How do they create the sentences? How do they create those paragraphs? How do they build an argument? And when you find a sentence that's really good, that you wish you could have written something like it, keep a file on your computer and type those sentences in. You're not going to plagiarize them, but you can learn to copy that style with your own words, because sentence structure does not have a copyright on it, right? So learn to copy the sentence structure of people who develop things really well. And again, in the book, I have examples of it, because you learn from the best. You look at the best journals who have the good writers, and you learn to copy their style. Just like Picasso and everybody else started by imitating the great masters, and then developed a style of his own. Okay?
Thank you very much. I think we have to let Natali go because she has other arrangements. But before that, I'd like to say that really today we had an example of a model lecture. And you say we try to imitate the great masters. You are a great master. I'd like to applaud to a great master. And yes. And another thing I'd like to add is that you have demonstrated the clarity of persuasion. You've persuaded us all that writing an article in English is an uphill struggle, and you've persuaded us also that we need more of your visits here.
Oh, please.
So you've persuaded us. Yes.
Please invite me back.
And another thing that I noticed, you see, you said it's a typically Anglo-American view, but I found some Russian roots in what you were saying, because the theory of dialogue was introduced by Bakhtin, a Russian, scholar Bakhtin, who said that all the time the thought is generated by another mind. So there is always a dialogue between the writer and the reader, and your idea of having a reader all the time in the mind of the scholar is brilliant, because this is actually the very Russian idea. So thank you for finding this overlapping area between Anglo-American and Russian conceptual worldview. And the last thing, well, actually, I'm just overwhelmed with emotions. And when you were talking about active voice, I recalled this very emotional play by George Bernard Shaw, Mésalliance, when he writes about a woman who decided to break away with a traditional conventional marriage. She wants to just live a wonderful life, rich life, and she says, I want to be an active verb. I want to act, I want to do, I want to create, and then it continues. So you've set our mind in a very active mood, actually, and after this lecture, I feel everybody so much inspired and activated, and you are just a wonderful, wonderful, profound master, once again. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for being such a wonderful group to talk to, because it's the energy that comes back and forth. And if your energy hadn't been so good, I couldn't have done half of what I did, so it comes from you, too. From me to you, thank you.